let's talk for a minute about the discovery process itself. You basically got three ways to search for messages once you place a discovery hold on something. You can search from the Exchange Admin Center using that same wizard that we talked about earlier that you can use to put mailboxes on hold. You can search from the shell for specific email messages, or, and this is the really fun part, you can leverage this new thing in Exchange 2013 called the eDiscovery Center, which can do an integrated search across Exchange, SharePoint, Link, and in an on-prem deployment, even file shares that you are indexing with SharePoint. So pretty cool functionality. Now, since I said the L word, I'm going to digress for just a moment and talk about how we do that. Prior to 2013, Link had its own archiving function. You had to set up a SQL database to contain the archives. It was kind of a pain in the lower posterior. It wasn't necessarily easy to manage. With Link 2013 and Exchange 2013, you can enable integration such that your Link backups are pushed directly into the Purges subfolder of the recoverable items folder of the email account that's associated with the Link account. There's the stuff, and I'm going to give you another link that you can look this stuff in. There's the stuff that it will archive. There's the stuff that it will not archive. You can turn it on all the time, or you can set up the integration such that it only starts archiving when you place the Exchange mailbox on hold, which is pretty cool. And there's a blog out on TechNet that talks specifically about archiving options in Link 2013, how you set all this stuff up. Okay, running Link on premises with Exchange on premises, no problem. Running Link online with Exchange Online, no problem. Running Link on premise with Exchange Online, no problem. But not if you're running Link online with Exchange on premise. That's the one configuration that Microsoft does not support. Okay, so eDiscovery Center, of course, requires SharePoint. So if you're on Office 365 E3 or E4, you're golden because SharePoint is part of that function. If it's an on-prem deployment, you're going to have to stand up a ShareFile SharePoint. Good Rich, good year, you get confused. You're going to have to set up a minimal SharePoint deployment if you want to use the eDiscovery Center. Now, the other thing to recall or remember is that an eDiscovery Center is associated in a one-to-one relationship with a search services application. Again, if you're on Office 365, a search services application gets set up for you automatically as part of the provisioning process. But if you're running an on-prem deployment, you will have to explicitly define a search services application and tell it what to index. We don't have time to go into that, but that will tell you how to do that. You can set up a search services application to crawl SharePoint, to crawl Exchange, which implies Link if you're archiving from Link to Exchange, and file shares of folders that SharePoint can actually see and authenticate to. There are some things you have to do. There's some server-to-server authentication things that you have to set up, and there's an article that tells you how to configure server-to-server authentication so that, again, if it's Office 365, it's all taken care of. But if it's an on-prem deployment, there are things you have to do to set up the SharePoint server so that it can talk to the Exchange server and talk to the file servers and so forth. Now, I almost hesitate to mention this, but if you ever get involved with a large customer that has a large and complex SharePoint deployment, remember that this one-to-one relationship between the search services applications and the eDiscovery centers, if this customer has different search services applications that crawl subsets of their SharePoint deployment, you would have to set up an eDiscovery center for every different search service application. So it would be better to have a single search services farm that crawled the entire SharePoint deployment, and then you could have just one eDiscovery center that could search across everything. If you're working in the SMB space, you will probably never ever run into this, but just on the off chance that you ever run into a larger deployment, keep that in mind. Creating an e-discovery center is pretty simple, provided you have the appropriate rights to do it. You either got to be a global administrator for your organization on Office 365, or on-prem you got to be a member of the Farm Administrators SharePoint group. You go to the central admin site, you say I want to create a new site collection, you give it a name. If it's an on-premise deployment, you choose from a drop-down the search services application that you have previously defined. And then you choose Discovery Center as the enterprise template that you want to use. And this is what it looks like. The setup of the e-discovery center. Select your web application. Here's where you select your search services application. You give it a title. You give it a description if you want. You specify what URL you want it to live at. And then you choose Discovery Center from the enterprise set of templates. Bam. Navigate to that URL that you defined, and here's what you see. The Discovery Center is organized around cases. In this particular screenshot that I snapped, there were already some cases defined. So you could click on an existing case and go look at it. Or you click on Create New Case and start a new one, which takes you to something that looks like this. Create a new case, give it a name. Now you either create a discovery set, or if you already have a discovery set, now you can filter through that set and export from it. You create a new e-discovery set, give it a name, you click on Add and Manage Sources to tell it which resources you want it to search, and then you can start applying filters to it. So you click Add and Manage Sources, you get it the mailboxes and distribution groups you want it to search on Exchange. You give it the document libraries that you want it to search. You give it the UNC paths to the folder shares that you want it to search, assuming you've already set those up to be indexed. And then it will go out and look in those sources that you've just specified and say, well, okay, there's 232 items in this mailbox, and there's 421 items in this mailbox. There's the size. Here's the total number of items and the total size of all of those things that you said you wanted to search through. Now, if you look up here and you say, holy smokes, there's 4 terabytes of data, I think I need to skinny things down a little bit, then you can start applying filters. So here, you can put a query filter. TRAD star would return items with words like trader, trading, trades. Of course, it would also return tradition and traditional, so you may want to be a little more specific. You can put start and end dates. You can specify author or sender. Then you can click Apply Filter, and this will dynamically change to tell you what meets the filter criteria that you just specified. From here, you can place those mailboxes and SharePoint document libraries on hold, right from the Discovery Center. You can create an in-place hold without having to go out to Exchange to do it. You can also use Boolean queries here. So I might say, I want to see anything that has the word investor within 30 words of the word relations, or I want to see anything that begins with the string F-I-N-A-N-C. Finance, financing, financed, financier, etc. Now, if you place things on hold, when a SharePoint document library is placed on hold, then any changes or deletions of a held document results in a copy of that document being placed in a special document library called the Preservation Hold Library. So, once again, place that SharePoint document library on hold. We will make sure that we preserve the state of the documents at the time you put them on hold. So, if you then, after you've applied all your filters, it will take you to a preview of what it found that meets those filters. So here was a different query, wingtip within 30 words of marketing, and it's saying, all right, we found hits, 29 combinations of hits, here's how they were distributed. There were 54 appearances of the word wingtip, 32 appearances of the word marketing, 29 instances where it met this query, and here are all the hits. And you can click on one of those and it'll open the message for you. At some point in time, you're going to want to export that stuff. So if you click on export, now you give your export a name. There are some options. You can dedupe the Exchange content. So you may have found the same email message in half a dozen different users' mailboxes. Do you want to export all 6 copies of it, or you just want to export one? So you can choose to remove the duplicate content. If you're exporting SharePoint documents, do you want to include the previous versions of those SharePoint documents, or only the current version? And then, do you want to include items that may be in a SharePoint library or something that are encrypted or have an unrecognizable format? So that'll let you reduce the size of things. And then again, it says, well, okay, based on what you told me, here's the estimated number of items and the estimated size of that export. And it will export it in a format called EDRM, which stands for Electronic Data Reference Model. And that is an industry standard format that can be ingested into other third-party discovery tools. There are a few limitations on eDiscovery. If you have a mixed environment of SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013, you can search SharePoint 2010 content, but you can't place it on hold. SharePoint 2010 doesn't know how to place a document library on hold. 2013 does. As I mentioned, if you have a SharePoint document library on hold and you try to edit the document or delete the document, it will place a copy of that document in the preservation hold library. Subsequent edits do not result in that. Only the first edit. What we're focused on is preserving the state of the document at the time you place the hold on. So if it's edited more than once, the only thing that's going to be in the preservation hold library is the original form before it was edited the first time. The other thing is that if you have a document library set up to retain versions of documents as they are edited, out of the box, SharePoint does not search those past versions. It only searches the most current version of each document. If it finds a hit, and you go to export it, you can choose to export all the previous versions along with it, but it won't search the previous versions when you set up the search in the first place. And then you can't search an Exchange 2010 server from an eDiscovery Center. It's got to be 2013 across the board. So again, if you're Office 365, no problem. It's all the latest and stuff. Latest stuff, but if you're doing on-premise, remember this is 2013 all the way if you want to use eDiscovery Center. And you cannot today, at least with these tools, you cannot place any kind of preservation hold on content in file shares. Okay, as we said, you can include a file share in a search services application, and assuming that it is included in being indexed by that search services application, you can search the content there as part of a discovery process in the eDiscovery Center, but there is no way today to place any kind of preservation hold on content on those file shares.